So, Mpho, day 33 of the nationwide lockdown, just days away from a level 4 relaxation. How are we treating the story today?
So today we have a couple of stories. We haven't spoken about power utilities and the provision of power because we haven't had a reason to really. And so one of the stories we're following is City Power, who is today looking at the provision of power from that entity's perspective. But also, we also touch base with Eskom in terms of their power provision for us. Remember, we haven't had issues because a lot of people have been working from home and industries haven't been functioning at their optimal level. But come Monday, at least on Friday, people are talking about how some people going back to work is going to affect the power grid. So we zoom in on that at the moment today with Hitekane out there. As well as other stories, you would remember that in Cape Town, at least even before the lockdown and COVID-19 spread, there's been issues with refugees who are out on the streets of the city centre of Cape Town.
Right.
So today, RT is at a portfolio committee meeting of Home Affairs where discussions will continue on what action to take or what things need to be put in place regarding those refugees in the city of Cape Town. The city of Cape Town has always said that the whole refugee matter is a Home Affairs issue. So we hope that in that meeting we'll get some light as to how that issue is going to be dealt with in the city of Cape Town.
And I imagine, insofar as that story is concerned, sorry to come in there, I mean, there's increased urgency because I think if you're anywhere near Johannesburg, you can start feeling the chill in the air, a clear signal that winter is really, coming about and probably sooner than the case in other years. So if we still having a situation where a whole group of people essentially don't have a home, it's going to be much more difficult and more pressing by the time winter comes about if we haven't been able to put this issue to bed.
Yeah, so it will be interesting to see how the portfolio committee and stakeholders there are dealing with that issue. One interesting story, and that story people have spoken about as well, is the COVID-19 deaths. So how do we deal how do mortuaries and funeral parlors deal with bodies in this time of coronavirus? So we zoom in on that story and speak to funeral parlors and families on how they feel this entire process has affected how people normally, observe that part of burying their loved ones. And so Linda is following that story for us today, and we're going to see and hear from people what adjustments, especially funeral parlors and undertakers have had to make to also keep safe, but as well as, giving people the dignified send-off that they deserve.
Absolutely. Especially this is significant because you'll remember Health Minister Dr. Zweli Mkhize is saying that in areas such as the Eastern Cape, a lot of the cluster outbreaks, is what he calls it, actually come from funerals because of the ways through which we've gone about ordinary practices, right? Coming back from the graveside, all of us sort of washing our hands in the same bath, using the same spoon to dish yourself when you have your meal following that funeral. So it's going to be a very interesting one to see how that aspect of life needs to adapt to the new normal. So it's certainly going to be all stories worth looking out for here on Newzroom Afrika. But to give you an idea of how the newspapers are treating some of the big stories today, we'll start off with The Citizen, sort of honing in on an issue, Mpho, that I know is also very close to you, and that's to do with schools, right? What on earth are we doing with pupils considering the radio silence, really, from not only the Basic Education Department, but also the Department of Higher Learning, right? So they're having experts weighing in on the prospects, for instance, of being able to save the syllabus this year and asking very serious questions about how much of the curriculum, realistically speaking, can we still save at this stage when there's still no clarity around when schools will open.
Look, I have anxiety about this because my biggest issue really is about how do you then split a classroom that is 50 children into smaller classes, especially at government school, and as well as the fact that you don't have the teacher capacity to be able to teach those children normally. So, yeah.
Certainly going to be an interesting one to look at. I know you're looking at the Business Day? Or the Sowetan?
The Sowetan, yeah. So the Sowetan has a couple of stories on page 4, they have a story about a community in Limpopo that is very anxious after a traditional healer in the area tested positive for COVID, but also died from the coronavirus. So, and from what we understand is now the village, the Department of Health in Limpopo are now going into the village to track and trace people who may have come into contact with this traditional healer. Sure. There. But there's also an interesting story about the Department of Human Settlements. Remember they had said that they will be moving people from densely populated areas to different areas. Now they're talking about an issue called reblocking, which essentially means that they will keep people in those areas, but move people to adjacent spaces where there's room, and also create an environment where emergency services is able to move through those areas and health personnel if and when the need arises. So I thought that was an interesting story to look at in the Sowetan as well.
Yeah, the term that was used before was de-densification. Yeah. And then I think a lot of activists and civil society organizations raised concerns around just the language, right? Like a lot of people who are affected by this don't even know what, de-densification suggests.
Is about.
Yeah. But the interesting thing to note there is we've seen in history that a lot of South Africans who are moved to specific places don't really move after that, So we'll be able to see how that all pans out. Very quickly, I'll look at the Star before we get into the business day. At the bottom of their sort of front page, they're reflecting on a crisis really unfolding in the U.S., not only because of the coronavirus infections, but because of the ways that U.S. President Donald Trump is handling the situation. You remember he's made disinfectant comments, essentially suggesting that people should insert disinfectants into their bodies in an attempt to sort of thwart the coronavirus outbreak. Needless to say, that's all becoming a huge PR crisis at the very least, and we'll see how he tries to handle that situation. The business day?
Quickly in the business day, we're going to talk about, again, the DG of Treasury, Mpho Raphata, is talking about ways in which Treasury is going to try and give the money that is necessary to the country, but also how do we rejig the budget and the economy so that everything happens as it should. But the big story, though, that we're going to look at as well today is their headline story saying the NPA set to roll on Transnet looting case. Remember state capture? Part of what it primarily was to do was to find out who looted state coffers and how the Gupta family and their associates were part of it. And Karen Moon really explains what the way forward is on this story.
Absolutely.